I'm Zack Bennett. I was born in 1981, but somehow I missed out on seeing the greatest movies of the 1980s, so I'm fixing that. I'm going to watch these great films and talk about them with my friends who have loved them for decades. This is Video Oblivious.
Episode 8, 1984's Footloose. Illegal dancing? I mean, is that really a thing anywhere? I don't know. Welcome into Video Oblivious. I'm Zack Bennett, and this week we are talking about Dirty Dancing, wrong movie. Footloose. Already did Dirty Dancing. It's a dancing movie. They all run together. And my guest this week, you've heard her before. It's nice to have a female presence again on the podcast because since you've been on, Audrey, my beautiful wife, it's been all dudes. And so I'm excited to have another lady. I've got more ladies, I promise, that are going to
Yeah, you need to get some ladies on
I've
here.
got them.
What's going on?
It's, well, one of them just had a baby, and so we had to kind of push off her involvement until after.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's an acceptable excuse,
After the pregnancy ended and all that. So anyway, welcome back to Video Oblivious, my wife, Audrey Bennett.
Yay!
We've been married, quick for the people who didn't hear the Never Ending Story episode, we've been married 15 years. We have no kids, just the two of us, and we do watch a lot of television and movies together. And when there's a movie that is 40 years old that we haven't seen yet, there's probably a reason why we haven't seen it, is one of us didn't really want to watch it with the other one. And Never Ending Story was probably, for me, back, the first episode, because it was a fantasy, like a kid's movie, and I just kind of felt like I had outgrown it. I have really no excuse to have not seen Footloose. And as we record this on Saturday, the 17th of February, it is exactly 40 years old. It came out 40 years ago this weekend.
I know. I really, I get Never Ending Story, like you said. I feel like you almost have to intentionally have avoided Footloose at this point to not have seen it, because there was a period where it was one of those that was on like TBS and stuff all the time. Like all the time it was on somewhere on like cable.
Yeah.
So for you to not have seen it, I feel like you just went, yeah, that's there. No, I don't want to watch that.
I think it was kind of more of, it doesn't seem like the kind of movie I would be interested in. I've never seen Flashdance either, which is a movie that it is compared to, for obvious reasons. Flashdance was a year older, came out in 83. But I've never seen either one of those. I guess dancing movies just never really appealed to me, but now I've seen two of them since the podcast
because you hadn't seen
began.
Dirty Dancing either.
And I loved Dirty Dancing.
So there you go.
And I've already watched it again a couple of times since I did the podcast with JR back a couple months ago. Footloose, however, let's get into it. The plot, pretty simple. And I knew the plot going in. I hadn't avoided it to the point where I didn't know what happens or what was going to happen. Like, I kind of knew already Footloose's plot. But very loosely, this small town in Utah has banned dancing, and the ban is kind of led by the charismatic preacher. And the law is challenged by this teenager who's a newcomer to town from Chicago, played by Kevin Bacon. Meanwhile, the preacher's daughter, Ariel, kind of rebels against her father and everything else that the town stands for. That's pretty much the whole story. There's not a lot of plot to this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing that I like about it is that I think even though the plot itself is pretty straightforward, I do feel like there is some decent character development and growth for some of the main characters, just because you see a lot of, and I know we'll get more into that later, but just especially specifically between Ariel and her father, because it starts off like she's just acting out and while like a teenager trying to get attention, and he's portrayed very like uptight conservative guy, and I feel like they both have a little bit of starting to understand more where the other one is coming from by the end, right? Like it kind of repairs that relationship with them, which I think is pretty neat.
We'll get into the character development a little bit later. Let's introduce the film. It was a Paramount picture. Again, it came out 40 years ago. It was February 17th, 1984. So exactly 40 years from our record date here. The director, Herbert Ross, he had previously directed Funny Lady with James Caan and Barbra Streisand. After Footloose, he went on to direct The Secret of My Success, which, of course, starred Michael J. Fox. That one's on the list. I haven't seen that one. I would like to. Steel Magnolias, he directed.
Great movie.
Did you know he directed that before?
I did not, but Steel Magnolias bring 10 boxes of Kleenex for that one.
And My Blue Heaven. He was the director of that the mobster movie that starred Steve Martin and Rick Moranis that came out the exact same time as Goodfellas, and it was about the same person. Two kind of competing movies that came out.
Very different look at it.
And a very different look at the same character, yeah. But that was Herbert Ross's contribution to film. Dean Pitchford was the writer of this film, and Dean Pitchford, an interesting story here. He was inspired to write this movie after he read a news story that came out in 1980 about a town in Oklahoma called Elmore City that had just lifted a ban on dancing that had stood since 1900, an 80-year ban on dancing through most of the 20th century. So my question, does anybody actually ban dancing? The answer is yes. That's where the inspiration came from an actual news story. And here's something else about Dean Pitchford. Not only did he write the film, he wrote almost all of the songs on the soundtrack. So you think about it, he wrote Footloose along with Kenny Loggins, the song. He wrote Let's Hear It for the Boy with Tom Snow for Denise Williams, and he wrote Almost Paradise with Eric Garman for Mike Reno and Ann Wilson. So we'll dive into the soundtrack in full a little bit later with all those songs, but Dean Pitchford, he had a Broadway career, he had done choreography. If he had not done anything else in his life, this movie and those 3 songs alone are enough to fund his family for generations.
Right. Just that is impressive.
Holy crap.
And I know you said we're going back to the soundtrack later, but it deserves it, right? This soundtrack deserves a little, let's talk about that when we get there, because it's great. The whole soundtrack is just such a great classic hits list.
Top to bottom. And we will go through the track list a little bit later. Rotten Tomatoes, though.
I know, they don't love it.
Well, of course, a movie this old, Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist 40 years ago. So what they've done is for movies like this, they take modern reviews and they go back into the archives wherever newspapers have archived film reviews online. They kind of combine those. They use look-back reviews where modern reviewers will look back at a previous film. It's 55%, which really surprised me when I saw that.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well. I know it's not like some amazing, dramatic movie, whatever, but I did expect it to be a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking, because it's such a classic, right? Here's how I knew it was the 40th anniversary. I was at work yesterday, and we have a television at the radio station I work at that's always on NBC, because that's where we get our news from, is the local NBC affiliate.
Yeah.
So the Today Show's on, and they're running a feature. It's like 40 years of Footloose. And you and I had just talked about doing this movie, and you had seen it, again, Thursday night. I didn't watch it until last night. But I'm looking at it going, well, that's fortunate. I had no idea it was exactly 40 years when we had planned to do this episode.
It was just perfect timing. Look at us.
But it's at the point where it is a 40-year-old film, and it's still getting a 5-minute segment on the Today Show. That's how iconic it has become over the years. And
sure. Well, you look at all the things that Kevin Bacon has done in his career, and most people to this day, the first thing they think of about Kevin Bacon is Footloose. I really believe that.
First thing I think of Kevin Bacon is The Game, The 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen Footloose until...
But just in general, 40 years later, this is still one of the very first things that's associated with him when his name comes up.
Yeah, definitely. And he's done a lot of stuff. Kevin Bacon, between this movie and the other film that he was in, Diner, a couple of years prior to Footloose, he began to develop a reputation in the mid-'80s that he was just that kind of bad boy, young character. And he got typecast for a little while and didn't find any real success in film there for a few years. You know what turned it around for him?
What's that?
The cameo in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
No kidding.
At the very beginning of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, he and Steve Martin are fighting for a cab in New York City, right? And... he doesn't even have a speaking line in that movie.
No, he literally just stares Steve Martin down, and then they both make a run for the cab. Yeah. That's the whole scene.
That's his whole involvement in that movie. But that connected him with John Hughes. And he starred in a John Hughes film the next year called She's Having a Baby.
Oh, and I've never seen that one.
I haven't either, but that's what is considered his career revival. It kind of rekindled his career and ripped him out of that typecast young bad boy.
Interesting. And that's such a minor, it's just a blip in that movie. I do kind of get, besides just, that he did 2 movies where he was bad boy, but he kind of has that look, right? Like he's not as clean cut looking.
Well, especially with his hair.
Exactly.
Footloose,
with
right?
like the crazy kind of hair.
Yeah.
And he does that little smirk that's like, where he just looks like he's up to something all the time.
Yeah.
So like I get why he fits that type.
Yeah. But 55% Rotten Tomatoes. Let's talk about Siskel and Ebert. So I'm reading a book that is called Opposable Thumbs, and it's the story of Siskel and Ebert and how
That's a great name for that book, by the way.
It really is, isn't it? But it's the story about how they came together and how they just hated each other and developed a respect for each other, but never were really friends. Very interesting book because I grew up watching them review movies on TV, and that was kind of where I got my movie information, because if they liked it, it was in every newspaper ad for movies all the way up until Gene died. It was 2 thumbs up, right?
Sure. Like, I didn't even watch the show, but everybody knew, whether you watched the show or not, everybody knew. What did Siskel and Ebert give it, right? 2 thumbs up. What's going on? That meant it was like the movie. You had to go see it.
Do you want to guess how they decided on this one?
I can, but you put it in the notes so I can see it.
You can see it.
So
okay.
That's kind of unfair.
Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But Gene liked it. He didn't love it. Gene Siskel liked it. Roger Ebert hated it.
I would honestly not have been surprised if neither one of them liked it.
Well, Gene liked it with a caveat. He thought it was mainly just because it was fun, and it was an escapist movie, right? You could just kind of sit down and enjoy the dancing scenes. Roger's thought was it's too wordy, and there are really only 3 dancing scenes in the whole movie. And Roger didn't really care much for the plot of the film. And it's fun to watch those two because that archive is up on YouTube. That's where I found the TV show from 1984. This was early in their television relationship and early in their relationship period. And there was a little bit of sparring going on. Roger really thought Gene was stupid for enjoying this movie.
Yeah, well, and I get it. There's not as much dancing in it. But that's where, that is the main plot of the movie, but I don't think it's necessarily the heart of the movie. The heart of the movie, I think, is, like I said earlier, it comes back to kind of relationships between the characters and not necessarily about the dancing itself.
Yeah. Let's talk about how well it did at the box office. It was budgeted for $8.2 million, which was pretty high for a movie in 1984. Compared with some of the other ones that I've been covering, was more like $4 and $5 million. So this one had a decent, robust budget for that time period.
Yeah.
Made it all back on its opening weekend. It was the number 1 movie, made $8.5 million in its opening weekend. It was the number 1 movie for the first 3 weeks of its release. It was the biggest February movie ever to that point.
Really?
Yeah, February is typically a down month for a film.
Yeah, it's in between like the holiday push and the summer blockbusters and whatever.
But it didn't. It was the highest grossing February movie of all time to that point, and it was dethroned in its 4th week by Splash with Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, which I have seen. That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one.
Okay, let's talk about the movie. Let's get more really into the discussion here. We talked a little about Kevin Bacon. There's only a second starring role behind Diner and the typecasting. Laurie Singer, I want to talk a lot about Laurie Singer as Ariel, okay? She was a Juilliard grad, so she is a...
classically trained.
Yeah. If you don't know what Juilliard is, it is the highest level of acting school, really, that you can go to in the United States, maybe in the world. And that's where she found herself. She was a graduate of that. She had appeared on the TV series Fame. After Footloose, she didn't do a ton. She had some steady acting roles through the early 90s. It's been sporadic since, but she's still acting at the age she is now. Oh, wow. 40 years later, she had a role in 2023.
Oh, well, nice. One thing I did, because when I was looking up stuff before we came to do this, Kevin Bacon was 26 and she was 27 in this movie.
Yes, and that is my biggest beef.
And they look it, right?
Let's do a caveat here.
Okay.
You and I have not spoken about the movie since we each saw it. We watched it separately this week, and we have not talked about it until now. We've been saving it.
No, specific, every time we look at each other and think that we're thinking about it, we're like, stop, go to something else.
Let's save it until we're rolling tape, right?
So this is it, guys. You're getting the real live impressions here.
Lori Singer looked every bit of 27.
Right. She does not look like a high school senior.
In no way does this woman look anything like a teenager, and I could not get past that for the entire movie. Oh my God!
Look, she's almost 30. I mean,
she was. I think when they filmed it, she was 26, and Kevin was 25. So we're in the same range there. John Lithgow was 38.
That was going to be my next point. And
Dianne Weist was 35.
So, like, there is in no way do either of these people look like they could be old enough to be her parents.
No. Lord have mercy. I could not get past this for the whole movie. And
she's great in the movie. She just doesn't look like an 18-year-old
not
child.
Kevin Bacon
He's more believable.
He's more believable as an 18-year-old. I mean, he's got, except for his stupid deep voice in the movie. But as far as his look, he has a little bit of a baby face. And with the hair, it makes him look a lot younger, right?
Yes. No, she looks every bit of 25, 26 years old in this movie. I
could not get past that. I mean, the whole time I'm just thinking, she is the most unconvincing teenager I have ever seen in a movie.
Well,
ever.
And they put her like Rusty, her best friend, is played by Sarah Jessica Parker, who was like 17 at the time. So she definitely looks like a teenager. And then you put her up next to somebody who's like 10 years older than her, and it just really makes the Ariel character look even older than she does.
She's 12 years younger than the man who played her father.
Well, and
and 10 years younger than her mother. So, I mean, if you want to make the joke about the puritanistic ideals, if everybody's the age that they are in the movie, then Mom and Dad are...
Look, maybe there's a reason he's overly protective, because he knows what can happen.
God, man. I was just blown away by that, because I'm watching it and I'm thinking... I stopped the movie to Google it. I'm like, how old is she? She's not a teenager. She was 26, and I think she looks older than that, honestly. I mean, I would have guessed 32.
I will say, like, it bothered me less. I do not know. I know one of the things you always ask is, like, the first time the guest saw the movie.
Yeah.
I could not tell you the first time I saw this movie. If I had to guess, I was probably maybe 10 or 12 years old, young enough that part did not bother me, and so I have attachment to the movie without that being a concern. But as I've gotten older and go back and watch it, I'm just like, oh my God.
Well, you've seen these memes going around lately with like the cast of Cheers and how old they were when the photo was taken, and they're all in their early 30s and they look so old.
Or even like the Golden Girls is another one I've seen, and they show their actual age. And I'm like, when I was a kid watching this show, I thought they were like 70 years old or something on that show.
Wasn't Rue McClanahan like 49?
Yeah, she's like in her 40s.
Yeah. I mean, people look younger now than they did back then, but even so, I'm no.
But in no world, like I don't see how even in 1984,
84,
that she was believable as an 17, 18-year-old student in high school.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, we went way off on
that.
No.
That's where I wanted to go with that, because I mean,
it is. I can see how
lost me for the whole movie.
I can see how as a first-time viewer that would be very distracting. Like, I've seen it enough at this point. Like, it's there, but I know the story. I'm not paying attention to that part as much, but I can definitely see how that would be distracting.
It was overly distracting. Let's talk about the rest of the cast. We mentioned John Lithgow as Shaw, Dianne Weist as Vi, her parents. Chris Penn as Willard. I really loved Chris Penn in this movie.
Did you recognize who it was?
No, because I didn't know Sean Penn had a younger brother.
Okay.
I Googled it to find out who it was, but I thought his character, now I think he was only like 18 when the movie came out. He was very young.
Yeah, he was about 18 or 19,
But he's believable as a teenager, more than anybody else in this movie. He's got that innocent kind of look, and not just that, but the way he acts. He acts like a teenager.
He acts like a teenage boy.
Right.
Like, I think that's a great character, because he's kind of goofy, he's a little awkward. This is how teenage boys acted when I was that age.
I did not expect the scene where Willard and Wren meet each other for it to go the way that it did, because I was expecting new kid comes into town, he's immediately challenged by this big bully looking guy, and I was thinking a fight scene was coming. And all of a sudden they hit it off and they become best friends in that moment.
I mean, I really, like, that's something else I had noted when I was watching, because when I was prepping for this, I watched the movie, sat down, and just like made notes straight through as
Stream
I'm
of
watching
consciousness.
it. Yeah, just as it comes up.
So did
on
I,
the
and we're
screen.
going to go through both of those.
But that's one of the things that I have always liked about this movie is that, you have, obviously, there's this whole idea of like small town and everybody's like real uptight and overly conservative and rigid. But even though there are characters that show, a lot of antagonism towards Wren coming in, oh, you're the big city kid.
Woody especially.
Yeah.
Right.
But there are equal numbers of people, especially like the students, I think, that really accept him. I mean, like right off the bat.
Yeah.
And it's very different from the way a lot of
teen movies.
Yes, are portrayed at that time, and even still, I think, probably, although I don't watch teen movies as much these days, obviously. But it's very different, and I kind of like it, because I'm not saying there's not problems coming in from a new place, but it's kind of nice to just see, like, teenagers being kind to each other without having to go through the whole, like, we're going to beat each other. Like, that's there, but it's kind of with the character that is not the main character, right? Like, he has with like her boyfriend Chuck and his buddies and all of that stuff.
Oh, is it? I was thinking that was Woody. Is that a different character? Well, there's the kind of the whole gang of
but like that whole like
the good old boys,
like
right?
Like there's that group that goes really after Wren, but then like same thing. Like this is such a spin on its head. This scene where he meets Willard, because like you said, you're expecting a big farm guy and he's going to take on the little city guy, and who's the new, and it's just immediately he just like laughs and they're like, okay, now we're buddies, and they this like bromance that goes between them through the movie.
It's great.
It's kind of great. Like all of a sudden they're buddies. They're like besties, and I love it.
It's very wholesome.
Yeah, and it's a nice change from what I feel like is kind of a typical writing for
a trope, right?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I loved the relationship with Willard and Wren throughout the movie, and how as soon as they get to know each other, then they go in the lunchroom and he's telling him this crazy story, and Willard's just buying it hook, line, and sinker, and the Wren's like, no, I made all that up.
Like, I'm just screwing with you, man.
Right.
And
I kept waiting for like some sort of antagonistic relationship between those two, and it
never happens. Like even right there, like you expect, oh, now he's going to be mad and like you punch him or something.
Yeah.
And
like you got one over on me.
Yeah, like, and they're not. And I really like, because I feel like in the way they're portrayed interacting with each other throughout the movie, it's not like, oh, Willard is the good old boy from the small town who's like really getting him in, like showing him how you should be doing. And Wren is not the slick city kid who's showing him how the big city. It's like a mix of the two, right? Mm-hmm. Like they really help each other in different situations.
When they're riding in Wren's car and he's asking him about the different rock bands. Oh, you like Men at Work?
Oh, yeah.
That's
he has no clue.
It's a funny gag. I mean,
is.
It's clearly just a joke scene, but it is funny.
It is. But
what are they doing? Are they working? Are they men? They working? No, that's the name of the band.
Yeah. And it's, it's funny. But yeah, I really like I said, I like the little friendship between them. And I like that I feel like there's a lot of equal give and take between them. It's not like one of them is fixing the other one. They each have Willard shows him, hey, here's kind of how things are around here, what you need to watch out for to stay out of trouble. Yeah. But then, Wren comes back and shows him how to dance and like loosen up a little bit. So I feel like there's a really good, like a healthy friendship in that.
You ever heard of the Police? No, but they're right behind you.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, it's funny play on word stuff, but that was a laugh scene for me, definitely. Let's talk about you and what attracted you to this movie. Do you remember the first time you saw it?
I don't actually remember the first time.
Probably on cable.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And I knew the music before I had ever seen the movie because my parents had, I'm sure, seen the movie and had the cassette tape for the soundtrack. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those when I got old enough to, be kind of more aware of that. This is a soundtrack that I grew up on. Like we've talked about before, you grew up on a lot of 60s rock and stuff.
Yeah, because my dad was from that era.
Yeah, my parents, there's a little bit of an age gap, so I grew up on a lot more 70s.
Right.
And then into the early 80s. And so this was in that. So I can remember, oh my gosh, being a little kid.
Well, you were 2 when this came out. Oh, you weren't even 2 when it came out.
No, not quite.
You were a year and a half old.
Yeah. And so this is, soundtrack part of my childhood, right? Like I can remember this being on and just like running through the house singing along to these songs. So
yeah. What made you fall in love with the movie, though, as opposed to just the music? So as you got older and you started watching it, what attracted you to it that keeps bringing you back when it's on?
I mean, I think initially it's just, I liked it. It's a fun thing. You know, when I was younger, it's teenagers like taking on the man kind of thing, you know, and when you are a teenager, you kind of are into that. And you're like, yes, like we're going to show the adults how things are done, you know, how it should be done, because we know
better.
Exactly.
We know better than these old
exactly. Somebody told me one time, the older I get, the dumber I get. And I was like, yeah, I can relate to that, because when you're a teenager, you know it all.
You know everything. You got to figure it out by the time you're 17.
So
right?
I think that was one of my initial things. It's just, it feels like, hey, the teenagers are taking on like the adults who control everything, and they win, right? Kind of.
So you were a teenager when you kind of fell in love with the film.
I think so. Like the music I knew first, the movie came later.
The music was ubiquitous.
It's unavoidable.
Yeah.
But the movie itself, I think probably I fell in love with more as a teenager. And again, that would have been when it was probably on cable TV a lot.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's probably where I saw it the most. And again, watching it now, you know, as I get older, relate less to just the teenager storyline and more to, as I've mentioned, some of the relationships, and like not necessarily on the side of like Reverend Shaw and the townspeople or whatever, but just I can see, I feel like the way that John Lithgow plays that character, you can really see, especially throughout the movie, that it's not necessarily coming from a place of trying to just control everything. He is scared.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. We'll in the stream of consciousness notes, which we'll still get to.
Yeah, I know, we're jumping around.
That's one that I thought, because I'm like, God, they're just so uptight and controlling, and I mean, it kind of sounds like some things current state legislatures are trying to do, especially here in this state where we live. But anyway,
we're not going into politics.
Don't want to get too political, but I couldn't avoid that thinking of it, because I'm like, we still have politicians trying to do this sort of thing, and
there always will be people trying to control. That's just life.
Yeah, suppress people's right to express themselves, right? Which I'm thinking when I'm watching the movie, I'm like, the ACLU would have had a field day with that law.
Oh yeah,
right. I mean, it's a straight violation of the First Amendment.
It's absolutely insane, and as you mentioned, does not seem like a realistic premise until you find out this is a real thing,
that it really happened.
Yeah, and I think it was like, it's based on that town, but of Elmore. But I think that's not the only place where this was a thing.
Probably not. But what I was getting at was we learn in little pieces, like little nuggets are dropped throughout the film, why he is so adamant. Especially, I mean, it sounds like all the adults in the town are, but there's a good reason why. There was a car crash that killed several teenagers, and they said it's probably just because of that crazy music they were listening to, and the dancing and the drinking and the drugs. And so we're just going to go ultra conservative and try to just nip that in the bud before they can get to that point. Then later we find out the real motivation is that one of the kids was the preacher's eldest child. And that was like, oh, okay.
I mean, like, did you have, because
I had no inkling, no.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really because of trying to watch this movie more maybe analytically this time than I have, looking for things like that. I feel like that's really a moment, right? Like when it comes out that it was Ariel's brother, and
I had to rewind it because I'm like, wait, what did I miss there? Because it was said kind of not in an understated way, but she kind of said it fast, where she said something about my older brother. And I was like, whoa, I want to make sure I didn't miss that. So I rewound it 10 seconds and watched that part again. I was like, okay,
yeah,
now I get it.
And I mean, she does kind of just blow past it, but I feel like the way that line is delivered by her character is very telling for her character as well, right? Because it's taken over her whole life. Mm-hmm. And it's a small town, so everybody knows she's the little sister of the kid who died. And so now she's having to explain it to Ren.
Yeah.
and she's so sick of talking about it, and so she's just trying to get it out and get it over with and move on past it.
I understand why it was written the way that it was, to reveal that so late in the film. There's maybe 30 minutes left in the movie.
I mean, it's really late in it,
but
like,
maybe it should have been said earlier. I don't know.
I mean, I kind of like that it's that way, because that's where I feel like as the viewer, you get a little bit of that journey, right? Like, because in the beginning, you're kind of supposed to be all on the side of the teenagers who are like, this is ridiculous, this is so controlling. And so we kind of do this journey with Ren, right? Because that's how he sees it. And so...
Because he's new to town just like we're new to town.
Yes, and so we're meant to relate to his story throughout that. And so I think, you could have revealed that earlier in the movie and just had Ren not know it until then. But I feel like it's such a moment for the viewer and Ren to have that experience at the same time, where it's like, oh, there's this like moment of just like, I get it, right? Like I get, it's not just that they're being jerks and super controlling. There's something deeper to this.
When you think of Footloose, I always ask this question of every guest. Just you see the poster or you hear the title of the movie, what's the first thing you think of?
It's got to be like it's going to be every time I think either the opening or the closing sequence, right? It's either with the feet and the song and like just ramping up there, or just that like at the end when they're all doing the whole big like dance at the prom, right? Like those are the two big like every like bump you into it and out of it.
What's the connection between those two scenes? There's an obvious connection between those two scenes.
Sure, it's the dancing part.
Well, more so, it's the song.
Oh, yeah.
Kenny Loggins.
Because it's the song.
The song is at the beginning and the end, and one time randomly in the middle of the film. But
that's
it's the song.
Right? Like the song, it's a great song. It's still holds up. It's
I'm
so
tapping
catchy.
my foot while it's on in the movie. I've heard that song hundreds of times.
Right? Like it opens the movie with just the feet, and I'm like sitting there, and like you've heard the song. I've seen the movie, I don't even know how many times at this point. And it comes on, and like I've been listening to the soundtrack in the car for the last 2 days because since I watched the movie.
So have I. I listened to it on the way here. And
it's like, I'm like dancing in the car, and I've heard, but it's like that beat that starts the song right there with that little like bass riff or whatever. I mean, it's like you can't not at least tap your feet to that. Like you can't. It's like involuntary.
No, it's still such a great song 40 years later. And no, I also was listening to the soundtrack on the way here.
We drove here in separate cars, just so you know.
Yes, because we're at the studio where I work, so you have to go home, and I'm staying at work.
So when he says he listened to it in the car, we did not ride here in the car and not know each other were listening to it. We were in separate cars listening to it.
That's crazy. Thank you, Spotify. We did not have cassettes like Ren does in the movie.
No, you know what? I'm pretty sure that either my parents or I don't know that. I was going to say maybe my mama, my grandmother would have had it, but somebody I seem to recall having it on like an 8-track in somewhere. So I can remember doing that too at some point.
So let's talk about the soundtrack while we're here, and then we'll get to the real discussion, which we're 30 minutes in and we haven't even gotten it. No, that's fine. It's a podcast. There's no timing. I work in radio. I'm always worried about getting to the exact moment. No, I love this format. I don't have to stop.
Very different.
Very different. Footloose, the original soundtrack was released in 1984, actually a couple weeks ahead of the film. It was released in January 1984. Listen to this track list. I mean, it's 9 songs, and every one of them is recognizable, at least. 2 of them were number 1 hits. Another one was a top 10 hit. There were a couple more that you hear still on when you're listening to 80s mixes or whatever, or a radio station does an 80s weekend or something. You hear these songs. So, of course, there's Footloose, Kenny Loggins. Let's hear it for the boy, Denise Williams. I did not know that was from this movie because I've never listened to the soundtrack all the way through. I've heard that song forever. I did not know it was from this movie, nor did I know it was specifically written for this movie. It doesn't really fit into the narrative of the film. It's just a pop song that it's in a montage scene, actually, when he's teaching. It's when Ren is teaching Willard how to dance.
Yeah. Which is, it doesn't really fit that scene in the film other than just that one line, right? It's just kind of like, hey, you're cheering for Willard while he learns how to dance. But the rest of the lyrics don't really go with that.
Then there's the love theme from Footloose, which, even though that's in the title of the song, Almost Paradise, I did not know that it was from Footloose. I'd never associated it because I'd never seen the movie. But Almost Paradise, Mike Reno and Ann Wilson. I didn't even know until yesterday that Eric Carmen was one of the co-writers on that song. He had a pretty stellar career of his own in the 80s as a performer. Then Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero. Again, did not know that was from this movie. I would have thought Karate Kid. If you had told me that song and just said, what movie is that from? I would have thought Karate Kid.
I could see that.
Yeah. Dancing in the Sheets, Shalimar. Wasn't a big hit, but you still hear it.
Yeah, and it's just a small part in the movie, but
it's
still.
a little hokey song, but it's one of those that has still stood the test of time. From the
it
80s.
is, and because where in the movie it's when they're towards the beginning when they're at the drive-in and she is dancing, and then her dad shows up, right? So very suggestive kind of lyrics. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that's when her dad shows up.
Yep.
So it fits in that scene.
Then the final three songs, not as popular, or the final four, not as popular as those first five, but I'm Free, Heaven Helps the Man. That's another Kenny Loggins song. That was also a released song. Was not as big of a hit as Footloose. I think it's probably been overshadowed by the Footloose song. Somebody's Eyes, Carla Bonoff. The Girl Gets Around from Sammy Hagar. And Never from Moving Pictures. And, again, Dean Pitchford wrote all 9 of those songs,
which is
with other artists, but he had a hand.
But he was involved in all of them.
Goodness, and then you add in some other songs that were in the movie, "Hurts So Good" from Mellencamp and "Waiting for a Girl Like You" from Foreigner. Those were not written for the movie, but they appeared in the movie, and they were on the soundtrack re-release in 1998.
Yeah,
and they did a 15th anniversary edition.
Which because we're talking about it right now, but because when I was looking up stuff, I had heard this at some point and I had forgotten. But Kenny Loggins and Dean Pitch, they wrote this song while Loggins was like on painkillers. And
really?
Yes, and Pitchford was
I didn't know that.
What was it? He was sick and taking like decongestants like crazy. So they were both basically like loopy when they wrote this song and put it together. Like
Footloose.
Yes. And
now it's one of the most iconic songs of the decade.
Yeah.
And because it is so tied to the movie, too.
Yeah, it was something about, like, Kenny Loggins was supposed to be out on tour, and he fell off the stage. Like, the lights were too bright. He couldn't see the edge of the stage or something, and fell off and cracked his ribs, and that's why he was on painkillers. So
the movie definitely came before the song, since the song was written for the movie.
Yes, they wanted it written for the movie.
I didn't really like that it appeared halfway through the film for whatever reason when they're in the country bar and it comes on and everybody's dancing to it. I just felt like that was a little overkill.
Yeah, and because it's a country bar, right, it felt...
it was the movie set in Utah, so I give that a pass because, I mean, that's just, I think, just the bar in the town.
That's fair.
Bars didn't really have the themes 40 years ago that they have now. It was just a small town...
So you just play the hits, right?
Right, you play whatever is the hit. And, of course, especially in that era, country music sucked in the early 80s. You weren't going to play... I mean, the only band that was worth anything was Alabama. And you had Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings still hanging around from their heydays in the 70s. That's about it. There was not a lot of good country music in the early 80s. Millsap. Okay, let's throw in Ronnie Millsap. But anyway. But, yeah, I didn't love that. So we're going through the movie. Now that let's go through our stream of consciousness notes here. So when it starts and I see the feet dancing and the song comes on, this is going through my mind. I'm like, I've seen this before. I don't know, because I'm going, and I mean, I'm thinking, should this even be on the list? I know I've seen this before. I know it. It hasn't been that long ago. And once it gets past that scene and the actual film starts, I'm like, no, I've never seen this. But I don't know where I've seen that, the toe tapping feet, all the different, because all you see is from ankle down, just different feet with shoes on dancing to the beat of this Kenny Loggins song.
Well, there's a similar scene in The Breakfast Club when they're dancing in the library where they just show their feet.
I can sense it with the Kenny Loggins song. I'm like, I've seen this before. I know. It
Is
might
it
have
in
been
the music video for this?
Maybe.
Because I
don't
know that and I have not seen that in years and years. I should have watched it before this, but
Possibly.
I do know that they show scenes from the movie in the music video, so you may have seen it if you had seen the music video for the song.
Or it might have been on one of those compilation movie greatest movies of all time kind of shows, or one of those things. I don't know. Maybe that thing Rob Lowe did about the 80s recently.
You know what? That might have been it, because that was not that long ago when we watched that.
Yeah. By the way, that's great. If I would recommend that. I think it's on Disney Plus. It's National Geographic, like the countdown about the 80s. Yeah, it's really, really
like
good.
the best. Is it the best movies or just stuff about the 80s?
Oh, they did 7 or 8 episodes, and it was like a top 10 countdown of all these different things, and some of it was
different pop culture things.
Right.
Okay.
And toys
I remember watching
and
it,
foods and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, I do remember.
It's really
that.
good.
It was interesting. If you are especially of our age, or Gen X or somewhere that actually experienced part of the 80s, for sure.
Yeah.
It's worth a watch.
Yeah. And you should probably have seen all these movies that I haven't. So, stream of consciousness. Okay, I'm going to start and just give my quick impression of the movie before we get there.
Go for it.
I didn't like it. I was bored.
Oh.
I was bored through this movie. I kept checking the time, how much of this movie is left, and that's how I know I'm bored with a movie, is I kept hitting the button going, oh, God, it's only 30 minutes in. Jeez. Okay, I'm going to power through. I'm through.
I'm 0 for 2 now, because you did not love Neverending Story either.
And now I know why we've never watched this movie together, because I was not interested in it, and I didn't love it, and I could not get past Lori Singer looking 40 years old. I couldn't get past it. It was there the whole time I'm watching it. I'm just like, I'm out. I'm out. I can't function with this movie if it's so poorly cast.
Sorry.
I would have rather had seen Sarah Jessica Parker in the lead role.
Yeah, I mean,
I would much rather had seen her. She would have been much more believable, especially at that age, because she looked young.
Well, she was.
I know.
She was like the age of the character.
She was 18
or
19. And the whole time I'm thinking, Lori Singer is overacting this. And as I'm researching and find out she's a Juilliard grad, I went, well, that explains that. She's classically trained. I did not like her in this movie. I know you said, oh, she did great. I was holding it back. I didn't think she did great.
That's okay.
I did not enjoy her. I did think the Ariel character has a freaking death wish.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I said. Pardon the language, but I typed, holy shit, that car surfing scene. I thought Teen Wolf was bad.
That's exactly. I was like, I have a note that says, the stunt with the car is completely insane. What is it with 80s movies and teenagers doing stupid car stunts?
So
we talked about Teen Wolf.
We talked about Teen Wolf with Adam 2 episodes ago, where the characters are dancing on top of this box truck.
Yes, which I told you when we watched Teen Wolf. When I was a kid, I thought that was the coolest crap ever. Like, I would never do it, but I was like, oh man, that looks so like awesome to be standing on top of a van and do. I don't know why. I was young and stupid. I wasn't even a teenager. I was like a child, young and stupid. But this one...
Holy crap.
This one is freaking terrifying.
And as I'm 42 years old watching this, I'm just like, no, I don't care if it's a stunt or I'm like, no, don't do that.
No, like I'm watching that. I'm like, what? I feel I'm like I am the parent in this scene, right? Because I'm screaming at the TV. I want to scream at her. And I'm like, what if they hit a bump? What if anything happens right now?
These two
what
cars
if your
have
foot
to be going.
Slips?
The two cars have to be going exactly the same speed for this to work, and it's not like there was cruise control and smart cars.
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, it's like
just
suicidal.
Just in case somebody's listening to this and isn't familiar with the film,
yes.
she climbs. She's in the car with her girlfriends. There's a pickup truck with, I assume that's her boyfriend.
Yes, that's Chuck, her boyfriend.
Chuck, okay. And then she climbs out of the sedan from the back seat, driver's side window.
While they're driving
at clearly like 50 miles an hour.
On a 2-lane back road.
On a 2-lane back road up a hill. And she stretches across and is standing with one foot on the window of each of these cars driving side by side until a truck comes.
A giant,
semi.
Yes.
And then she, at the very last minute, you don't even see it in the movie. It just cuts and she's in the truck. You don't really see her get in the truck.
Yeah, and it's like, and
it's just a frantic scene.
And because it's just like, it's clearly visible. It's not like the truck shows up and she freaks out and jumps into her boyfriend's truck.
She's daring it.
they see it coming for like a quarter mile away or something. They're like staring it down, and she's just like insistent, like everybody else is screaming at her to get in the car, and she's just like staring it down and almost kills herself and all of her friends and her boyfriend because she's like trying to make a point right here.
Okay. And then later we'll jump ahead to the scene where she is playing chicken with a train.
Also
She's
insane.
Standing in front of a train until Wren tackles her out of the way of the locomotive. And so let's just take those two scenes and put them into context. So she's the younger sister of someone who was killed in an accident. Is she acting out because of that? It seems like she would maybe want to be a little more careful with, I don't know.
I think that she's acting out in response to both pieces, right? Like, one, I think it's because you kind of get the impression throughout the movie that it's never, their family has not accurately dealt with the death of her brother, right? Like, they kind of just don't talk about it.
They suppressed it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that her stunts that she's pulling here is a combination of this whatever that she's dealing with, trying to process her brother being dead and not having the opportunity to deal with that in a healthy way. And because her parents, specifically her father, has also not dealt with that, he's taking that out on her, right? Like with the restrictions and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so she's acting out in response to both of those things. I think it's out of not being able to process her grief for her brother in a healthy way, and in rebellion to her father, and anger at him for just allowing that to completely, probably anger at her brother too, honestly, mm-hmm. but anger at her father for what sounds like, from conversations they have later in the movie, that it sounds like she was very close to her father at one time. And his also not dealing with this loss of her brother, that's damaged their relationship. And it's just, I think it's all of these things combined, because if you say that was what, 5 years ago, they said?
I believe it was 5 years, yeah.
And she's a senior now.
So she would have been in middle school.
She would have been like maybe 12, 13 years old. Mm-hmm. So you think about...
Lori Singer would have been 34.
Yeah, I know. But so you think about that, like, if you were 12 or 13 years old and your older sibling, you probably idolized this person, is gone. And in the process, your parents, who you've, count on to be the adults to handle everything, they can't fix it, right? And they completely close themselves off to you at a time when you need them, and trying to deal, that's a lot of heavy stuff to deal with as a young child. And she's been doing it for 5 years now, basically on her own. So that's why I said, I think there can be a lot more to this character than what it seems like on face value. Because if you just look at that part of her backstory, right, like, that's a lot of crap to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so in that context, to me, yes, these two things she's doing is completely insane.
She has a death wish.
But she has a death wish, right? Because her life has been so miserable for the last 5 years, and everything is out of control. And even, like, to the point, like she talks about wanting to leave or whatever. And when she
mentions that to Wren, that she's applied to colleges that...
But she even says it to...
Or maybe she was talking to Rusty, but she said she's applied to colleges that
Wren at one point, that even her father doesn't know about.
Right, yeah.
But there's also earlier when she is in the woods, when she's been getting it on with Chuck out there, and she says something about, I've applied to college, I'm going to get out of here, I'm not small town. And he says, honey, you're as small town as they come. Mm-hmm. And it's just like you see her soul die a little bit in that moment, because even this guy that's like her boyfriend that they've, seem to have been together for a while, like, she needs somebody to see her as bigger than the sister of the kid who got killed, right? And the preacher's kid.
Yeah. Preacher's kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known preacher's kids throughout the year. They tend to rebel just naturally, especially if the preacher dad is as controlling and conservative as the one at Shaw is here.
Sure.
Okay, more stream of consciousness.
Sorry, that was a lot. I know.
No, it's a point of the podcast. I just put chicken on tractors WTF. They're playing chicken.
Okay, do you love it or hate it?
Both. But, I mean, it was just like, this is so dumb. Like, they're playing chicken on these farm tractors. And I think I'd seen that scene before somewhere.
Yeah,
in a
that's a
clip.
pretty well-known scene.
Yeah, and then and his shoestring gets caught on the tractor, so he's not slowing down. And the other guy, is that Chuck? Or yeah, he bails, and then the tractor. And I'm like, real life, that tractor would have rolled over on Chuck and killed him.
Oh, 100%.
Especially when they're doing it on this like levee road, so there's an embankment on both sides. It's not like they just roll off, into a field. They're rolling down into a ditch, and this tractor just tumbles down.
100% he would be dead.
Yeah.
Did you even catch because it's real quick before they do that Chuck is over there smoking. And she makes a comment about you've had too much to smoke or something. They have a little thing.
Yeah, there's clear weed use in this movie all through it. I mean, the scene where Ren gets the joint. Was it Willard who gave it to him, or somebody did? And then he flushes it down the toilet.
No, it's one of the bad guy gang that's friends with Chuck, the boyfriend, because they're setting him up essentially in that scene, right?
That's
like they're trying to get him caught because they don't like him.
Yeah, and he flushes it down the toilet. And what does he say to the principal? Like, if that was real weed, would I have done that?
Yeah, do you know how much this stuff goes for?
Okay. He's a gymnast, so they don't really explain this. It's just there's the scene where he's in the gym with Willard, and he's doing all these on the double bars.
Weird and out of place, I think.
Yeah, so he starts doing the spinning on the double bars, and then the tumble and the landing and all that. I don't know what it's called. I just know it's gymnastics, right?
Yeah.
And then they do mention later in the movie that there's not enough money for another gymnast to join the team.
It's really just their excuse because they don't like him. Yeah, and so because he's, everybody doesn't like him, now they've made up a reason to kick him off the team.
Oh, you're talking about within the world. I'm thinking, to me, that felt like just justification for why he's even doing that.
No, because they say something about like you're not on the team anymore, and it's after he's had like the run-in with the cops, and they thought he had drugs. And so it's just one more way that they're saying like we're keeping you out because you're like bad news, big city kid or whatever.
He's so pissed off. He gets in his car, which by the way he drives Bumblebee, which I thought was cool. The yellow Volkswagen.
I know, and you love that movie.
I thought Bumblebee was great. I really did.
I know.
Which was set in the 80s, by the way.
So legitimately, maybe this is Bumblebee before he gets rescued.
Holy crap! Did we just come across a Transformers Footloose crossover?
You did it. You figured it out.
Are they in the same universe?
Somebody argue with us if you can. I think we've cracked it right there.
They are. Until somebody proves otherwise. He was driving Bumblebee around the yellow Volkswagen. But anyway, he's so pissed off. He gets in Bumblebee, and he drives to this abandoned warehouse, and he just has to blow off steam by dancing. God. And then he's doing gymnastics in this random small town warehouse that he probably has never been to before, and he's swinging around on cables that are dangling from the ceiling, and I put on my notes, this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen.
But it's one of the most iconic scenes in the movie.
It is, but it's so out of place. I mean, it's one of the dancing scenes that Roger Ebert, one of the 3 dancing scenes, right? I don't know. I just thought, this is so out of place. Like it's just a showcase for Kevin Bacon to dance, and
that's not all him though.
No, I'm sure there
were 4 stunt doubles involved in this.
I figured that, but I just mean it was.
But yes, for the character,
to dance, because that's his whole thing, right? He's a dancer. He's really a gymnast. He's not even a dancer, but that's how he blows off steam. He dances.
It is. Okay, I will say I'm not a dancer, and anybody who knows me knows that is the understatement of the year. But
confirmed.
Yeah, along with all my work friends who try to get me to dance at the Christmas party every year, and I refuse. But so I do not relate to that. I can relate to having a day where you need to blow off some steam and just like blasting music, because that is definitely like I've talked, Dianne and I, who's a friend of mine at work, have talked about
and our last guest's wife.
Yes, and Michael's
wife, have talked about like
there's music for different reasons, right? Like if I'm having a bad day and I'm really mad, I want some like angry 90s rock, and I'm just going to blast it, and it makes me feel better. So I don't do the dancing part, but I just want some music. You know, some days I listen to country music, some days I listen to, you know, musicals, whatever, based on the mood. But I can definitely relate to the part where just like you want to get away from everybody and blast some loud music.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you that. But I thought that
the dancing is a bit overkill, but it's
when he
a
swings
dancing
on
movie
the rope or the cable
that you don't even know if it's attached to anything.
My
I mean,
God. Okay. Then we see Shaw slap Ariel across the face, which is a turning point for his character, I think.
I think he realizes how far gone he is from who he used to be in that moment.
I think he does. And then he blamed her for it. And I think that's just a character flaw in Shaw, right?
Yes.
Is that he's like, no, she brought it on herself.
Well, and I think that's part of his thing right there, right? Like he realizes how far he's gone, but he's having trouble facing himself.
Yeah.
And so he blames it on her, but I think at the same time he knows that it's not, like he says that, but I think it's because he's in denial about how.
And he talks about that with his wife later on, and then we'll flash forward to the reconciliation of that relationship, and he does come around and all that. That was Roger Ebert's biggest beef with the movie, was that he's like, the preacher character does a complete 180 on his thinking, and it's never really justified why.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, to me, it's like, again, because there's hinted at that he was not always this way, you know, to this strict and all of this, and how much he's changed since he lost his son. And to me, it always has come across as like he is finally starting to process and move past that a little bit. And partly because, I mean, Ariel and Vi, his wife, kind of call him out on some stuff, right? Like,
oh, Vi definitely does,
like,
more so than Ariel.
Like I have written like 4 times throughout my notes, like Vi's my favorite character maybe in this movie, because she takes no crap off of anybody. She calls out everybody's BS, but not in like a hateful, harming way, like in such a loving way that she addresses these things that are going on. And she's just like, to be so soft-spoken, she's such a strong personality, like in her character, who she is as in that person.
Let's talk about the incredibly violent fight between Chuck and Ariel. Wow.
Little disturbing.
It was disturbing.
Yeah.
It was hard to watch. It was very hard to watch. I mean, obviously not something I would ever do or want to do. It's abhorrent for any man to hit a woman, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But that scene was, I mean, for it not to, I don't even know how to say it delicately. It was disturbing to watch. It was hard to watch that scene.
I mean, it's
brutal.
brutal.
He beats the hell out of her.
It is brutal.
Yeah.
Like, should have gone to the hospital, beat her up. And he is a large person.
And she fought back. And she got
did.
him a couple times.
And she did.
Yeah.
But he is a large person. She is a very delicately built person. And if anything, I feel like the damage that would have been done to her is understated in this movie, because if he hit her, like, you know, she's like touching up her black eye and stuff,
which goes away very quickly.
Yeah. And so she's like touching up around her eye, and like her nose was bleeding a little bit or something. But I'm like, if in reality, if a man the size of that person hit a woman who is built like her, there would be broken bones. I mean, he literally knocked her to the ground. He probably would have like wrenched her arm out of socket or broken a bone or something.
Yeah. But I did hate how it's never mentioned again, except that that's the end of their relationship. And then her black eye, she touches it up and, oh, does it look okay? Yeah. And then it's never addressed again. And her black eye's not even there the next day or
so
whatever.
Here's a question for you, because part of what we talk about is, you know, perspective from then versus now.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that it was an oversight in the movie that they left it out, or do you feel like further reference to that was left out because of the time period that the movie was made?
That's a really good question. I think it was just not an oversight. I think it was just, we're done with that part of the story. Let's just not bring it up again. I don't think, I mean, if we're talking about actual people that these characters represent, it would have been something that would have been, because it was traumatic for her character, right?
Yeah.
But in the context of the film, it's just like, well, okay, I'm with Ren now, and okay,
and that's it,
and that's
she's
it.
done.
Yeah, and to the point where the black eye's gone. That's what bothered me, because isn't it? It's within just a day or two when they go before the town council, and she's in there, and
there's no sign,
of a struggle at all.
He points it out. I think, like, when she gets home, she has it where she's tried to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, the next day at school, when Ren sees her, he kind of, like, is touching her face, like, let me check on your eye or something. And that's pretty much the last time you see anything about it.
But it was a really, really hard scene to watch.
And just to clarify, when I said about the time period, I'm not saying at any point, especially even in the 80s, would it be acceptable for this to happen.
Nope.
I do feel like that at that time, and again, it more so than it was maybe 15 or 20 years prior to that even, but even in the 80s, it was so much more of a thing that was not talked about.
No, you're absolutely right.
And obviously there are still situations now where this happens and it's hidden and whatever, but I do feel like there are, at the time that we are in now in 2024, there are, not that it's more accepted, but there are so many more resources available for people who need to get help with that, and that it's more something that people would feel comfortable going to get help and not just trying to hide it the way that she does in the movie.
And because I'm a broadcaster, I'm going to say, because I just know that when you touch a sensitive topic like this, you want to throw that out there. The National Domestic Violence Hotline
absolutely
is 1-800-799-7233. 1-800-799-7233. Or you can text START to 88788 if that's something that you're dealing with.
Yes, thank you for adding that.
Because
this is a real issue for a lot of people.
It is.
And I do feel
and
like
that's why it was so hard to watch.
Yeah,
That's
and I feel like it was
watch.
treated maybe not quite with the level of seriousness that it deserved in this movie.
Absolutely, and I'm not making light of it at all. I thought
No.
I thought it was out of place in the movie, honestly. I think you could have taken that scene out or changed it to some sort of much less violent encounter between the two of them, and it would have served the same purpose in the narrative of the film.
It could.
Especially since they didn't bring it back up.
No. And it does make me wonder when I've seen it, like, she doesn't seem shocked by his response
Nope.
to any of that. So how long has that been going on? Because it's kind of, the impression given is that this is in a relationship. She's been in a relationship with him for, a decent period of time. Is kind of the insinuation, implication, whatever. And so it feels like, okay, that's supposed to tell you that she's been having these kind of interactions, I think, with him throughout. And I don't know. It makes that whole part of the story much darker, I think, and to the point of me saying earlier that I feel like her character has a lot more to deal with, right?
Well, clearly.
So, I mean, on top of everything else, she's been in a relationship with an extremely abusive boyfriend, right?
Yeah, the same guy she was trying to climb into his truck an hour earlier in the movie.
Exactly.
Let's move forward to the town council scene. I loved Kevin Bacon's acting in this scene because Ren has been so buttoned up and confident, and hey, man, he's just cool. He's always got the quick quip, right? Whenever somebody says something, he always knows exactly what to say, and he's just so confident in himself. And when he gets behind that microphone, he's so nervous. I just thought that was a great acting choice, even though it was a little bit out of character. But I'm thinking, that's what a teenager would do if they're facing all these town council and something that's that important to them, right? He was nervous. He was stammering over his words and until he grabbed the Bible and starts actually quoting scripture, and then he turns into a preacher, basically. Yeah. But at the beginning, I'm thinking that's exactly how I would have been then, and probably even now, addressing a town council like that.
I actually have something kind of funny, interesting to add to that. Because I found online, like, here's random facts about Footloose, and most of them I knew, but this was one I didn't. Kevin Bacon needed half a Valium to get through that scene because he has a real fear of speaking in public.
No way.
Yes. His real fear of speaking in public resulted in hives appearing all over his ribs, so they gave him half a Valium to calm him down for that scene.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
So it wasn't just acting.
No, I mean, I guess some of it was, but like it really, like, which is
wouldn't think
interesting,
that for
right?
an actor.
As an actor, and
okay,
but I think it's just maybe a difference between the two. But.
Okay, I can relate to that because I sit in a padded studio, isolated, and talk into a microphone, and potentially thousands of people can hear it, and it doesn't bother me a bit. You put me on a stage in front of 20 people, and I'm nervous as hell. I think doing improv comedy the last year or so that I've been doing that has definitely helped that. It's not, I don't have that stage fright anymore that I used to, but I can understand that because there is kind of a difference for Kevin Bacon, the person, not Ren, the character.
Exactly.
But you're in a controlled studio environment and you've got that camera on you and you're just doing your thing. But if you're in front of people who all those eyeballs are looking at you in that moment, it does raise your self-awareness quite a bit.
Sure. I mean, you can, and I think I've told you this before, like, I absolutely hate speaking in public to a group, whatever, like any kind of let's give a speech. And to the point where when I was in maybe 9th grade, I literally took a failing grade on one of my assignments because I refused to get up and give an oral presentation in front of the class. Like, I was just like, you can give me an F. I don't care. I'm not doing it. Hate that. Hate it. However, I have, as something that I've done over the last couple of years, gotten up and, because I do acrylic paintings sometimes, and have done the live painting with events at our church, and having done it 3 times now, the last time, like, I didn't even blink at that, right? Yeah. Like, I'm fine because I'm in my comfort zone. Like, the painting part, I know I'm confident in my ability to handle that, and so it's not such a big deal anymore. And I think that's, to your point, that's kind of the difference, right? Like, he can act, he knows he can act to cameras, to a director, to whoever, versus having to get up and give a speech. And it just makes you hyper aware of every little, like, oh, like, you stumbled over a word, or did my face do something weird, or like, oh, I almost tripped, now everybody's laughing at me because I fell, or something, like.
Well, I work at a radio station, the one I currently work at. There's a window out to the public from the studio, so anybody can it's in a hotel, and so anybody can look in that window and watch me do my radio thing. And when there are people out there looking, I act differently. Like, I know that I'm being watched at that moment. It's much different than being in a studio that's closed and nobody can see you, and you're creating theater of the mind. Well, now you've got somebody staring at you while you're doing it. Sometimes they're actively trying to distract you, and those people
making faces.
Those people have a special place in eternity from my perspective, but because they're just trying to screw with me, right? But even if somebody's just standing there, I act differently when I'm doing my.
You're more self-aware.
I'm definitely more self-aware.
Yeah.
So I get that. That's interesting.
But I just thought that was really interesting, that because to me, I'm like, immediately I was like, but it's the same thing. He's still just acting. But then it's like, okay. Like, I get it. That's different for him.
So the church starts doing a book burning without Shaw's knowledge.
Yeah.
And that brought back some memories because my church did that.
Oh, I don't think I've heard this story.
Yeah. I'm not going to name the church. This was 40 years ago, 35 years ago. This was late 80s. And
was it for Slaughterhouse 5?
No.
Since that's what they were talking about in the
I don't
movie?
remember because I was only 6 or 7 years old, but I remember it being a big deal, and it made my dad angry.
Oh, I can imagine it would get your dad fired up.
But it was it was out behind the church, and they had I remember specifically it was like Madonna records that they were burning, and books and anything that was like vile and sinful, and they got news coverage. And
well, I mean, this was a real thing that was happening in the world at that time.
Yeah, and this was the 80s, and it's not like another church in that same town that is led by a firebrand preacher who makes headlines all the time did something similar a couple weeks ago or a couple years ago, and it made international headlines. And I'm thinking, Oh God,
like have we not moved past this at this point? Obviously not.
I'm not saying it was more acceptable in the 80s, but I just remember being there because I think they like made us go or something, or maybe.
Oh, I mean, 100%. Like,
well, my church and my school were. I went to a private school that was within the church, so it might have been during school versus church because I was there 6 days a week, and it was hard to separate the two. But I do remember specifically that happening, and I have vivid memories of that, and it just seeing this in the movie, it was like, well, I've been there. I was too young to really understand the significance of it. It was just something cool. Fire, we're burning stuff. But yeah, anyway, and you and I are both Christians, and I think we have a different, or at least I do. I'm not going to speak for you, but I have a little more progressive view of Christianity, less conservative. And I thought the character shift in Shaw, where instead of condemning the dance and doing everything to stop this dance from happening, which happens right on the other side of the railroad tracks outside of the town limits, so right as close to the town as they can legally do it without getting legally in trouble, right? Yes. Because the guy who owns the farm says, "Oh, you can use the farm. Yeah,
come on out. We're good."
Right, the farm where Ren works earlier in the movie. He's a cool guy, by the way. I like that guy.
Yes.
But the preacher decides, and he says, "I'm going to pray over it." And I was like, "That's the answer."
Yeah. Yes. See, there are such good things. Like this movie shows, like, believers, Christians, however you want to say that, being so close-minded, but the part that's like the journey of Reverend Shaw is such a beautiful part of it to me, because I think it shows what it's meant to be, right? Like, we're not all perfect all the time. We're going to make bad decisions, even if they're for good reasons that we decide that. But he has that growth in that he's willing to admit, I was wrong. And maybe it's not, Ren and the teenagers and Ariel, they're not 100% right. But he's like, I'm not 100% right either. And as somebody who is a believer, like, this is our answer, right? It's like, we don't hate each other for having different beliefs. We seek for the correct answer. We go, and if you're a Christian, you pray about it. You take those things to God, and that's where you find your answers.
Yeah. So I
love that part.
I loved that part of when I saw that character growth, where he in front of the whole church. He's like, hey, this is happening, and we're just going to pray that they make the right decisions. And I'm just like, bingo. Like, that's the answer that even today that a lot of Christians and Christian leaders still would be on the other side of that. Yeah. And they wouldn't come to that conclusion.
Yeah,
so
and I just love that.
I really did too.
To just kind of add one thing for Reverend Shaw, right before they do the book burning part, right, the guy's coming to talk to him, Reverend Shaw's at the church, whatever. This line, when the guy's like really pushing Reverend Shaw to, like, you need to come support us. You didn't support us when we got rid of this teacher and blah, blah. And just that he turns around and says this line that's like, how long does it take for this to happen? And he says, does it take as long as it takes compassion to die, or whatever in there? And I was just like, oh, like, burn, Reverend Shaw, burn. But it's, that's where you start to see that turning in his character, right? Like, he's not all rigid all the time. And then it goes on into this where he has that transition where it's like, yes, I was wrong. Yeah. Let's move forward.
And then we'll move to the final scene of the film. There's not much to talk about. It's a very fun scene with the Kenny Loggins song, One More Time, and we get everybody dancing. Although when they first show the prom, everybody's just sitting there. Nobody's doing anything.
Hey, again, also realistic for a bunch of teenagers, especially ones who have never been allowed to dance.
Okay. That brings me to my next point. So Ren shows up with Ariel. They start dancing. Everybody starts dancing. And suddenly, they all look like they took lessons from Johnny Castle.
Exactly.
Holy crap. I mean, we've got people doing the robot, and we've got people down on all fours, whatever you call that thing. I was just like,
Yeah, I have
sheltered kids suddenly know how not only to dance, but really, really well.
I have in my notes, how are all these kids suddenly professional dancers? Interesting thing about the prom scene.
Okay, I'm done with my notes, so go for it.
Okay. So I don't know if you noticed or not when you're watching it, but it has the whole montage of kids dancing. You get, like, there's Ren dancing, there's Willard dancing, there's Ariel dancing. There's no Rusty. There's no Sarah Jessica Parker.
Oh, I didn't notice.
The reason
She have a broken ankle or something?
No. They originally had a different ending for the movie.
Oh, okay.
It was still going to be the prom scene, but they wanted it to play out in slow motion.
Okay.
Slow motion dancing.
Instead of the upbeat Footloose song.
Like it was going to be slow-mo of them all dancing at the prom, right? The film was screened, and people hated it because this upbeat everything else, you want this like great happy ending. People hated it when it was slow-mo because it drug down the end of the movie.
The way a Broadway musical should always end on a big
like
high
a big pop,
note,
right?
Yeah.
No, and so they screened it, and people hated that it was slow. They said it made it drag. So they had to come back and reshoot the ending later, and it was they didn't reshoot it. Let me see where that said. It cost an additional $250,000 to do the reshoot. 6 weeks before the film opened, they reshot this.
So the final scene is the last piece of the movie that was actually filmed?
Yes.
Wow.
And Sarah Jessica Parker was not available at that time. She was doing something else, and I read that somewhere, and now I can't remember.
Interesting.
But she was not available, so that's why she's not there. And so, yeah, they had to, like, bring back in, like, that's why there's, like, none of the other background characters in there and stuff. They basically just went and brought in a bunch of extras that
and
could
apparently
dance.
very good
dancers. That could dance,
yeah.
And completely reshot the ending to the movie. But
okay, the question I have, because it's never resolved, did the law get changed? We don't know. I mean, Shaw has
not
turned.
Not at that time, apparently,
Shaw
because
has
they lost
turned.
it.
Yeah, Shaw has turned, but has the rest of the council and the rest of the adults turned? We don't ever get an answer to that, do we?
No, I mean, the only answer you get is that in that moment they haven't, because it didn't pass, right? That's why they couldn't have the dance
They
in
still
town.
had to do it right outside the town limit.
Yeah. Which is why I said I think it's less about, even though the main plot line of the story is they can't dance and we're taking on the town and we're going to make everybody dance and whatever. That's not, to me, really the point of it. It's more about these character development, both for Wren, for Ariel, for Reverend Shaw, as they go throughout the movie. Because, like, we didn't mention it, but there is at least a little bit throughout the movie that the whole reason Wren and his mom are here is because, like, his dad left, right? And they've had to move away from Chicago and come live here with his aunt and uncle. And by the way, Wren's mom, even though she is not in it very much, is also fantastic because, like, she has his back 100%. Like, her boss threatens her job, you know, if she doesn't get her son under control, and she basically tells him jump off a cliff. Like, I love it. It's so great because, like, Wren is, you know, like the rebel character in this, but despite the fact that he does, you know, he drinks, he smokes, whatever, but it's like those are all the things that people have the most problems with, and it's just such an interesting look on that everybody sees him as like the troublemaker, the rebel, the, you know, causing all these problems. And it's like, of all these teenagers that are involved, he's almost the most, outside of maybe like Willard, the most like clean cut, reasonable one of any of them, right? Like he just wants to live his life and be able to dance, and he's not asking for anything that much. And like to the point where they even go through the correct pathway to try and deal with it, right? Like they could have snuck off and organized a dance somewhere and just like told everybody like kiss my butt, but he wanted to do it the right way. And so it's just interesting to me that it's like he's kind of the one that's pushing for all of this, but he's not even doing it in like a disrespectful way. He even comes back later, you know, they have the dance at the farm, but even though they've got that workaround where they could do it there, he still goes back to Reverend Shaw to talk to him man to man, right? About to explain why he wants to do this, to try and mend that relationship with Reverend Shaw and with respect, which is just an interest, again, much like we talked about with him and Willard and their friendship. It's an interesting take on that because most teenage movies do not show teenagers behaving in this way. It would be more likely that they're just like, hey, screw you guys, we're having our dance out here and there's nothing you can do about it.
Because we're teenagers and we know better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I really like the way that it handles all of that part of it because it's a little bit different, and I think it's a really good example of a way that to deal with conflict, honestly, in a respectful and healthy way.
Let's talk about the actress who played Ren's mother. We didn't talk about her when we were going through the cast. Frances Lee McCain. She was known for playing movie moms in the 80s.
I mean, look at her.
Do you want to hear the other roles she had? I recognized her immediately from Back to the Future. She is Lorraine's mom, Marty's grandmother.
That's it. I did not remember that.
She was in Gremlins. She's the mom in that. Mom of Billy, the main character. Yeah. And she was Will Wheaton's mom in Stand By Me, which I haven't seen. But
well, that's why you didn't get that.
It's on the list. But yeah, so I recognized her immediately as Stella Baines from Back to the Future.
Yeah, well, your love for Back to the Future, of course.
Yes, exactly. The 180s movie that I have seen. That's the reason why I haven't seen all these other ones. I watched Back to the Future over and over
like
and
400 times.
Quite a few times. All right, let's wrap it up. Sands of time. One of the questions is, would they remake this movie? They did remake this movie. Almost, and you said you've seen the remake, and I saw the trailer last night. It looks like a shot-for-shot remake in a lot of scenes.
I mean, it is really, really similar. I watched it.
Same character names and everything.
Yeah.
They moved it so the Ren character is from Boston instead of Chicago, and it is set in Georgia instead of Utah.
Yes.
That's really the setting difference, but all the characters have the same name.
But it's essentially the same.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I will say, I have only seen that one time. I watched it.
It was 2011, so it's 13 years old.
Yeah, I watched it. It's been several years now on Netflix sometime when I was just at home looking for something, and I was like, yeah, there's nothing jumping out. I've never seen this remake. Maybe I'll give it a shot. I'm not going to say it was terrible. It just seemed unnecessary to me. Like, the original one is so iconic of a movie. And the new one just felt like kind of a cheap knockoff version of it. You know, I'm not a huge fan of people remaking existing things. I don't think it needs to be done as often as it is. But if you're going to remake it, like, there should be a reason for you to remake it, right? Put a new twist on it, like, make some changes, do something different. And it was literally the same movie.
They added black actors and introduced hip-hop, apparently, according to the trailer that I saw.
I did have a comment on my notes right at the beginning that I was just like, there are no black people.
Well, it's Utah.
Here. And I know it's Utah, but I was like,
Not a diverse cast at all.
Not a single. These are all super white people.
And we'll talk about that. This is the Sands of Time segment. Has the movie aged well? Not particularly.
Not necessarily. Like, I mean, again, things that because I am white, did not really strike me as a younger person watching this. But yeah, when I watched it through this time, immediately I was like, dude, there's nobody who is not white. Every
character in the movie is white. I don't even think we see a person of color.
No, not even like in the background. Like, there's not people in the church. There's not people in the town. And like, I get it. It's small town America. It's Utah. Like, I got it.
Yeah.
Come on now. There is at least one somebody that should be there. That, you know, it's not great.
So the 2011 version, a little more diverse.
Yeah.
The 2011 version starred Kenny Wormald as Ren. I don't know who that is. I may have seen him in something else. Doesn't look familiar. Julianne Hough was Ariel.
Yeah.
Country singer, right? She did some country music back in the day.
You should know.
Yeah. Dennis Quaid played Reverend Moore. Andy McDowell was Vi. Miles Teller was Willard.
Yes.
In the remake. And it got a better Rotten Tomato score than the original.
Did it really?
It did in 2011. Well, of course, they had many more reviews to draw from, but 68% for the remake versus 55%. Also, they remade the song for that movie. The song, Footloose.
Yeah, the song
from the movie with Blake Shelton. It sucks. But you can't touch the Kenny Loggins version. It's so iconic.
Why do you even try?
But, yeah, they could have included the Kenny Loggins, but they wanted to update it. It's being set in the South. They wanted a country singer. I'm sorry, Blake Shelton, I love you. I know my company's in business with you. That song sucks. And and it did not even crack the top 40 in country. That's why I didn't remember it. It was released, but it was not a hit on radio at all back in the day in 2011.
Yeah, I will say, because I'm skimming this real quick, I had forgotten in the new one, Ren's mother is dead when he comes to live with the family.
So there is a little bit
so
of a
like there are
difference
some minor changes.
But in the trailer, you see him tackle the Ariel character away from the train, and you see him in the warehouse that looks almost exactly like the warehouse from the movie, where the first one, where he's blowing off steam. And you see him and Willard dancing in the hallway, almost shot for shot, echoing the original. Of course, I've only seen the trailer, but I'm like, they're clearly going for that nostalgia pull.
And which I get somewhat, like if you do a remake, you're going for some of that. To me, and again, I don't remember all the details of it. It's been a hot minute since I've seen it. It did not leave a great impression on me just because it felt unnecessary, right? It felt like I said, you're not making any major changes to it. There was not a reason to remake this so similarly to the first one.
Audrey, I have enjoyed talking about the movie more than I enjoyed watching the movie. Thank you for coming down here to the studio with me today. I really have enjoyed the conversation. Has it changed my mind on the movie? Maybe I like it a little more now that I'm thinking about it, talking about it with somebody who likes it so much. I don't think the movie's aged particularly well. I always ask that question, that if you found it and it was in a can and had never been opened and you just found it, how would we receive it today? I think it would be seen as slow and boring, honestly. The way I saw it is just slow. Like, there's not much plot that advances. It's an hour and 45-minute film, and it really felt like every minute of that to me. It did not. It felt slow and boring. And
I can see why it would be that way, for sure, because it's not. It does not, like, there's just not a lot of plot to get from point A to point B, right? It's very simple.
Yeah.
This is where you're trying to get to. I don't necessarily think that it would be received as well today, if for no other reason than, especially in 2024, it is completely unbelievable that there would even be this law in place anywhere.
And I think the movie and the music are so married and so welded together. The music made this movie. And I think that was a big part of its success, was the music.
Absolutely. I think if you look at that objectively between the two pieces, the movie just on its own with some kind of generic soundtrack would absolutely not be what it is. Because start to finish, we talked about the soundtrack, like so many good songs with this that I don't think it would be anything. It would be utterly forgettable without the music.
Yep. They're so tied together. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate you coming in, talking about it. I know it was hard to secure you as a guest for this episode. But
I will say, I'm sorry, I do not have an unending shower of confetti to rain down on us to celebrate the end of the show.
It never stopped.
I was like, where is this confetti coming from, and who has to clean it up?
Well, clearly the employees of the farm that where they bag up all the grain.
Well, the kids cleaned it up for the prom.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have like 2 hours of confetti to rain down on us, but we can be celebrating that we're done anyway.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I thought it too.
It's utterly ridiculous.
All right. I'll see you at home.
Bye.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Video Oblivious. And stick around, another new episode with a different movie is just a few days away. Thanks to my guests for being a part of the show. And if you'd like to be a part of the show, send me an email, zbennett@gmail.com. That's zbennett@gmail.com. Maybe there's a movie you love that I've never seen. Send me an email, we'll connect, and we might even talk about it here on the podcast. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, whatever your platform allows. Give us a good rating if you really enjoyed this podcast. And thanks again for listening to Video Oblivious.